Hey everyone, I'm Mao, a designer working on the video game industry, and welcome to the Game Design Perspective. Quick disclaimer, the topics we're about to explore in this video are my opinion and my opinion alone. They do not represent any other person, entity, company, studio, or employer, past, present, or future. With that said, let's begin. So in the world of video games, the Final Fantasy series has long been revered for its captivating narratives, innovative gameplay, and stunning visuals. With each new installment, fans eagerly anticipate the next chapter in this iconic franchise. However, not all Final Fantasy games are created equally, and comparing them can sometimes be like comparing apples to oranges. In this video, we will explore the topic on why I believe comparing Final Fantasy XVI to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is actually an unfair comparison, and why I think Final Fantasy XVI should actually be compared to Final Fantasy VII Remake. The most important reason for this topic is that Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Remake are both the first of their kind. One of the key distinctions between Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth lies in their respective genres. Final Fantasy XVI is more accurately described as an action game with some RPG elements mixed in. On the other hand, the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy is firmly rooted in the RPG genre, as it is building upon the original PS1 games, RPG mechanics, and narrative depth. The difference in genre influences the gameplay and overall experience of each game, catering to different player preferences. Now, the combat systems in Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth further highlight their divergent design philosophies. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth builds upon the innovative combat system introduced in Final Fantasy VII Remake, blending real-time action with strategic elements. Players must carefully manage their materia and skills and choose their actions wisely to succeed in battle. In contrast, Final Fantasy XVI places more emphasis on player skill and reflexes, with combat that rewards precise timing, execution. You could argue that Final Fantasy XVI comes from Devil May Cry, but only slightly. The design, though somewhat similar, is not the same, and is not building upon the technical aspects of any previous game. Both systems, 16s and 7 remakes, have their merits, offering unique challenges and experiences for players to enjoy. Which leads us to the answer of the topic. The disparity between Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the development process. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth benefits from the iterative nature of its development, building upon the foundation laid by its predecessor, Final Fantasy VII Remake. This allows for a more expansive world, more diverse gameplay mechanics, and deeper narrative experiences. Final Fantasy XVI, on the other hand, had to start from scratch, resulting in a more limited scope and scale. When it comes to map and level design, both Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Remake are actually kinda similar. They are both linear games. While Final Fantasy XVI does offer a bit more in terms of open areas compared to Final Fantasy VII Remake, the majority of both games are structured in a fairly linear manner, with the story unfolding in a predetermined path. Despite their differences, the two games are more similar in this aspect than they are often given credit for. Both Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Remake are both groundbreaking in their own right, being the first of their kind. While they do inherit some elements from their predecessors, such as the materia system for Final Fantasy VII Remake or some gameplay aspects from Devil May Cry in Final Fantasy XVI, they're not simply rehashes. Instead, they build upon these foundations to create a new and unique experience. It's important to note that Final Fantasy XVI is not simply a copy of Devil May Cry. While it may share some similarities, it is a distinct game with its own identity. The foundation of Final Fantasy XVI does not come from a technical aspect of Devil May Cry. They did not reuse the engine or any technical aspect involved with game development. The comparison between Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is unfair, as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is building upon the foundation laid by Final Fantasy VII Remake, technically and design-wise. The development process plays a crucial role in shaping the map and level design of these games, as well as the scope of its entirety. With Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the developers had the advantage of building upon existing systems and art styles from Final Fantasy VII Remake. This made it way easier to iterate and expand upon what was already in place, leading to a more expansive map compared to Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy XVI. Not only map, but we're also talking about mini games and character interactions and all of those mechanics that personally do not know what's coming up for Rebirth since I have not watched any trailers. I do not like watching trailers when I'm sold on a game or a movie, so they are gonna build upon them, I just don't know how. When comparing Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Remake, they share a lot of things and a lot of things are also different. You might like one over the other, but if you were to mix Final Fantasy VII Rebirth into the story, well, yeah, it's gonna emerge as a clear winner. As an iterative sequel to Final Fantasy VII Remake, it expands upon the original game's narrative and gameplay meaningful ways. The story is more fleshed out, the characters are gonna be more developed, and the world will feel more alive and immersive. In contrast, Final Fantasy XVI, it is a pretty solid game, but it's not gonna have this depth and completeness that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is gonna have. Now, if I'm gonna give a point to Final Fantasy XVI over Final Fantasy VII Remake, is that Final Fantasy XVI feels like a complete experience. So in conclusion, while both Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth are excellent games in their own right, they offer very different experiences to players. Final Fantasy XVI is more action-oriented, while Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is going to be more strategic and blend into this turn-based and real-time strategy game. Ultimately, the choice between the two games will come down to personal preferences. In my opinion, I like the combat system more from Final Fantasy VII Remake, but what I do like about Final Fantasy XVI more is that it feels like a complete game. When I finish Final Fantasy XVI, I feel like I'm done with the game. I have this feeling of conclusion. I'm satisfied with it. While Final Fantasy VII Remake is just hyping me up for the next game. I don't feel like I am done with it. I don't feel like this is a conclusion. I just end up expecting the next installment in the remake trilogy. Final Fantasy XVI feels more like a complete experience. But anyway, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth releases today, and I cannot wait to play it and to pretty much don't sleep for the next month. Alright guys, I hope that you are as excited for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as I am, and let's all enjoy it together and not spoil anyone in the community because this is gonna be hype. Alright guys, like, comment and subscribe please, and see you on the next one.